Chapter 4 The Webs We Weave. Sam emerged from the elevator smiling from ear to ear. I thanked God as Max playfully ruffled his hair as they headed back to the limo. I could tell the meeting had gone well from the exuberant smile on his face. "Looks like everything worked out," Sai said, leaning against the door. I turned, still unable to look her directly in her eyes. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get the kiss to stop replaying in my mind. I couldn't even look at her without my mouth feeling funny. The warmth of her lips, the sweet scent of her perfume, mixed with the intoxicating smell of her hair, had me in a trance. It was like I realized for the first time in my life my best friend was a girl, an amazingly beautiful girl. I fought every romantic thought that entered my mind, but I knew for the time being I was captivated with my best friend. "Looks like somebody got some good news," she replied, walking up to Sam. He paused before glaring at Max hesitantly. He measured their gazes to see if it was okay to spill the beans. Max signaled with his hands that it was okay, while at the same time inconspicuously winking to signify that everything had gone according to plan. "You guys will never guess what happened," he gushed, smiling from ear to ear. "As I was going to use the restroom, a guy recognized me in the hallway and asked me if I wouldn't mind going to his office. It turned out he was your agent. He told me he thought I had potential. He wanted to sign me too. I guess someone here knows talent when they see it." I forced back a smile. I couldn't give away the fact that I was happy for him. He would have known something was up. I gave my best poker face as Sai and Jacob exchanged greetings. It was therapeutic to see his smile. It was almost like we were connected. I was so happy for him. "All right, Sam, you're in the clique," Jacob smiled, putting him in a headlock. "Yeah, I guess I am," he said, smiling as Jacob playfully gave him a noogie. "I mean, I always knew I was awesome, but I guess I forgot." Although his transformation was subtle, I could still see the old Sam for stints. The confident, brash knucklehead I had known wasn't the person standing in front of me, but I could tell it was a step in the right direction. "Sam, why can't you ever get anything without being an arrogant knucklehead?" Sai jabbed, crossing her arms as she leaned against the limo. "I'm just joking," he replied in a humble manner that gave us pause. "I know, I didn't earn this, but God blessed me with it anyways. He's always doing things like that for me. Every time I pray, I just know it's going to happen. I can't explain it, but I knew he would do it for me. I don't know how, I don't know why, and I don't care. I'm not going to waste this." A part of me envied his faith. From the beginning, it never wavered. Whether it was the training or the battles, he gave his all and left nothing in the tank. He strived to be the best, and now I finally understood why. It wasn't vain praise or selfish accolades that pushed him. That wasn't what made the kid so determined. There was more to it, and the longer I spent with him, the more his true nature showed itself. "Well, I guess I owe him too," I replied, awkwardly staring at the ground before forcing my gaze toward him. "I'm glad what I did didn't end up costing you a competitive advantage." He stared at me as I awkwardly rubbed the back of my neck as I spoke. I reached out hesitantly to congratulate him, as everyone stared at us, making the situation more awkward. He stared at me for a second, then smiled and returned my handshake. "I told you, man. You couldn't have known what would happen. Don't worry about it. Trust me, I don't need you feeling sorry for me. I've gotten enough of that crap growing up," he jabbed, releasing our shake. "Not that I don't appreciate it, it's just I'd rather you saw me as competition. Especially now with the help of these guys we'll be on the same playing field, and sorry to say, you don't stand a chance." In the spirit of holding no punches, I'm praying my entrance is contingent on whether or not I do better than you. Sam sputtered, confused by my phrasing. Everyone expected a snarky comeback, but Sam just stood there thrown like he was trying to break down my statement and failing. "What's contingent mean?" Sam shot, causing everyone around us to erupt in laughter. Jacob bear hugged him as Sam stared around, still waiting on an answer to his question as Cy and I watched on, amused. "Big Sammy Sam," he replied with a smile. "The best of the best." Cy joined in on the hug as I tried to coyly slip out of distance. "Oh no, Mr. Cool," Cy shot, grabbing me by my shirt and pulling me into the group hug. We all smiled and prepped ourselves as Max snapped a lasting image with his watch. Okay, Max replied, signaling for us to enter the limo. "We have to go pick up the others." The ride in the limo was a nice contrast to the previous atmosphere. Sam, Cy, and I traded training stories as we pulled up to pick up Luke, Uriah, and Danielle. They looked all too thrilled to see us approaching. Luke nearly ran to the curb to meet the limo as it stopped. Uriah followed behind him as Danielle took a second to hug her lawyer before they headed off in opposite directions. "I told you that chick was whacked," Luke complained, plopping down next to Jacob. "What happened?" Jacob pried, staring out the window as Danielle approached. "She spent the whole time belittling us like we were children," he replied, taking his jacket off and tossing it to the floor angrily. "Well, more like belittling him," Uriah replied, sitting next to Max. "I think she kind of likes me." "Yeah, that's right," Luke replied, as if it was the first time he had thought about it. "Why?" Uriah chuckled to himself before staring at the limo door as if he was expecting Danielle to appear any moment. "It's easy. I don't say anything to provoke her," he replied. "She obviously doesn't think too highly of Earthborns. Why give her the ammunition? My grandfather told me that Lightborns feel we're lower-class citizens. A lot of them feel we are undeserving. They feel we shouldn't be in the same realm as them. One thing I realized is the best way to keep someone from saying something stupid is to give them less to say. Nothing we say is going to change her opinion of us. I feel like once she realizes what we can do, she'll change. I mean, when people see her, they see a snobbish, spoiled brat, and that won't change." "Yeah, people see her that way because that's what's there," Luke shot, leaning back obnoxiously. Uriah shook his head, disagreeing vehemently. He checked the window, making sure Danielle was still talking to her lawyer before he continued. "Not really. I'm a pretty good judge of people. I'm telling you, I don't think she's snobbish at all. I grew up around politicians and big business guys. I know snobbish kids. They ooze entitlement and selfish ambition. She didn't strike me as a self-absorbed or selfish person. Although she was sharp-tongued when it came to you, it was almost always in retaliation. She seemed more defensive than pretentious, if you ask me. Really, she just seems socially awkward. I think her hostility doesn't come from a place of superiority. I think she's reaching for attention. She has a need to feel special, and in a group like ours, she feels like she'll be outshined. So to counteract that, she tells herself that we're not special. Then if you take into account the fact that her dad is such a powerful man, it all makes sense. She wants her dad's approval. I've been thinking it over this whole time. Why would a girl in her position agree to join a crew like ours? When I thought about it, everything fit perfectly. It was either an opportunity for her dad to take interest in something she was doing, or it was one of the few options at her disposal. It seems like she was desperate. Her act is a front. She's nervous. The constant need to keep busy, the tapping of her nails on desks, the constant jostling in her seat. We intimidate her because she signed on to what she thought was going to be a makeshift legion, and it ended up being us. I mean, even the mission that she went on was botched. It's written all over her face. She feels like she's in over her head. That's why she gets so offended when we refer to her as a child. Most likely it's a label that is forced on her, and she feels it limits her ability to be seen as a viable asset. And more importantly, judging by the wall-to-wall security she has around her at all times, it seems her father sees her as a child himself, and it's a label she's trying to shed. Just my opinion, though. We all stared at him vacantly. I don't know if it was his words or the fact that his voice had no emotional inflection throughout the entirety of his speech, but we were all just captivated by how smart he was. Suddenly it all made sense. Both Beth and Pete were really smart and analytical. It would only make sense that he would be too. I guess his outward appearance had us judging a book by its cover. The whole time he was so quiet because he was taking everything in. He was analyzing us all. Pete was good, but judging by the way he took the subtleties of Danielle's personality and pieced them together so perfectly, Uriah was in a whole other league. "Yeah, it all makes sense," Jacob said, sitting back, analyzing things for himself. "What are you two talking about?" Luke interrupted. "If it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, it's a duck. The chick is whacked. I don't care how or why. I just want her to shut her mouth and stop mouthing off." "My brother the thespian, ladies and gentlemen," Sai continued, placing her head in her hand in a frustrated manner. "And your boyish charm is just the vehicle to accomplish that, right, Luke?" We all chuckled as Luke sat back frustrated as Danielle finally entered the limo. She now wore the same uniform as we did as she made her way to the back. She smiled awkwardly as she stopped next to the seat next to Sai's. "Hi, Sai," she replied to everyone's surprise. Sai looked over to me with a raised brow as she replied. "Hi, Danielle," she said, still staring at me inquisitively. The little girl stared around the limo, anxious and nervous, before subconsciously lowering her head. "Do you mind if I sit here?" the girl asked. Her nervousness was so strong, I could actually feel it with my sensory ability. Sai stared at me, confused about what to tell the girl. Danielle's smile slowly vanished as she turned to leave. Sai quickly moved her bag, forcing a smile to stop the girl in her tracks. "Of course," Sai replied, extending her hand, offering the girl a seat. Danielle's smile slowly reappeared as she dropped down next to the girl. Sai stared at me, nervous and confused, shrugging her shoulders to my nonverbal cues as the girl reached over and pulled her bags closer to her. Sai straightened up just in time to catch Danielle's gleeful glare. "Sai, I know you don't know me, but you seem like a nice girl. You seem really responsible and smart," she continued, rubbing her hands together subconsciously as she spoke. Sai forced an awkward smile, not knowing how to take the words of the little girl. As much as she chastised Luke about his take on Danielle, he had a point. Danielle had been little more than a sharp-tongued brat. She really didn't know her past their short interaction, so she had absolutely no idea what would come out of the little girl's mouth, and prepared herself every second for an assault. "I wanted to ask your advice. My coming of age is today," she replied, for the first time sounding like a child. Sai nodded to the little girl's words, even though she had no idea what they meant. "Okay, sure, what do you want to know?" Sai replied, still unsure of what to expect. "Coming of age, what's that?" Luke replied, rudely intervening in their discussion. The adolescent demeanor she had displayed before was replaced by a stone-faced glare as she sighed and turned toward Luke. "It's something you won't ever have to worry about, so please mind your business, okay?" she snapped with a sarcastic smile. Luke turned toward Jacob and pointed in her direction, shaking his head. "You see?" he replied, exhaling, annoyed. "Coming of age is the time where a Lightborn gets to choose their age," Max explained. "You see, Lightborns are not like us. They all start out as babies. Once a few centuries have gone by, unlike Earthborns who naturally grow with time, they are given the opportunity to choose what age they want to be. It's called coming of age because it's almost like turning 16 and getting a car, or 18 and leaving home. It's the first real decision a Lightborn gets to make absent of their Light Guardians. They can choose to stay a child, become a teenager, or even a young adult if they choose." "Why would someone want to stay a child?" I asked. "Well, sometimes people aren't sure what they want to be yet, or, quite simply, some people enjoy being a child," Max replied. Teenage is usually for people who have an idea of what they want to become but need more training. Young adult is usually the oldest you can go in the heavenly realm, and it is reserved for those who are ready to step into their creation roles."
Ahem,
Danielle interrupted, clearing her throat.
"Well, what I wanted to ask is, well, you're still kind of young, right? You're 12? Well, at least for another 3 months. Me and Tim over there have a birthday," she shot, pointing over her shoulder. "So, you guys share a birthday?" Danielle shot, contorting her face as she asked the question. I nodded as Sai continued. "Yep, we have literally been stuck together since the day we were born," Sai shot, forcing a smile. "Isn't that cool?" Danielle stared at her like she was nuts. Sai momentarily forgot the maturity level of the girl she was speaking to. Her words came out like she was speaking to a preschooler. Danielle seemed thrown by her demeanor, but luckily she wasn't worldly enough to know the meaning behind Sai's behavior. Sai closed her eyes, kicking herself. Danielle shrugged it off, ignorantly continuing. "I'll keep that in mind, I guess," she continued awkwardly. "Anyway, since I haven't really met anyone older than you that I could talk to about this kind of thing, I guess I wanted to know if you could be older. I don't know, maybe like a teenager. I guess what I'm saying is, would you do it?" "Yeah, sure," Sai replied almost instantly. "Really?" she replied with a smile, grabbing Sai's hand like a sorority girl at a slumber party. We all stared at them as they rocked back and forth, excited. "Are you saying that's what you're going to do?" Sai replied, covering her mouth in excitement. "Oh my gosh, you're so lucky!" "Oh, you don't know how long I've waited for this. I'm so tired of my dad treating me like a kid. He insisted that I didn't become older than 10, but after a couple days of whining, he finally allowed me to become a teenager. But he made me promise not to go older than 14, she replied, bursting with excitement after every word. "So when are you going to do it?" Sai replied. The girl stared behind her, bursting, before turning back to Sai, excited. "Okay, just give me a second," she replied, holding one finger up as she disappeared into one of the bathrooms. It seemed like in no time flat the bathroom doorknob started to jiggle. "I wish that chick would disappear altogether," Luke replied, still agitated. "I heard that, you idiot," an unfamiliar voice replied as the door swung open. There was no mistaking it. The voice was Danielle's, but it was noticeably more mature than the annoying high-pitched voice we had become familiar with. As she appeared from the bathroom, our jaws dropped to the floor. It was safe to say it wasn't the same cute little girl as before. "So, what do you think?" she said, looking towards Sai for approval. "Are you serious? You're gorgeous," Sai replied, circling her as she spoke. The cute little preschool girl had transformed into a drop-dead gorgeous teenager. She was so beautiful that even I had to double take to make sure I was looking at the same little girl as before, but it was unmistakable. All her features were the same. Everything about her was the same except she was more mature. She was of course taller, but also her baby fat was gone. It was replaced by femininely chiseled features that even had Luke staring with his mouth open. "Are you kidding me?" Jacob replied, also staring in disbelief. Luke quickly realized what he was doing, before sitting back, forcing a blasé-type smile on his face. "So what? Same brat, different package," he jabbed. "I'm older than you are, you idiot, and even in your world I'm the same age as you," she replied, cutting her eyes at him. "I was just stuck in that form. I was supposed to be changed by the time I met you guys, but when I got caught, everything was postponed. I never wanted you guys to see me in that form. I knew from the moment you saw me like that, you would always see me as a kid, and idiots like you wouldn't stop calling me one. So shut your stupid trap and stop calling me a brat." Luke rolled his eyes and sat back, ignoring her as he stared out the window. "Ignore my brother, he's too busy being cool to notice when he's being rude," Sai replied, holding her hands as they both sat. "Was it painful?" "No, it's like growing except in an instant. I didn't feel anything at all," she replied, playing with her hair.
That is so cool,
Sai replied, unable to run out of superlatives to describe how impressed she was.
I got an idea. Do you have like a Facebook or blog with friends in this realm? I'm sure they're dying to see what you look like.
Danielle's face stiffened at the sound of Sai's words. She forced a smile and gave a hesitant nod as she mashed a couple of buttons on her watch.
Yeah, sure, she replied. I'll just punch up HIP and do that right away.
What's HIP? Sam wondered out loud. Holographic Interface Portal, Max explained, without so much as looking up from scanning our files. He had been doing it since we got back in the limo. Aside from the occasional explanation, he ignored everything around him. I assumed he was updating our files, but I couldn't tell for sure because the screen he was using was invisible. It looked odd as he contorted his face, measuring what he was reading with his fingers. "It's a new thing," he replied. "The older beings in this realm find it to be useless technology. It's a trend brought over from the Earth realm by the technology age. They were so used to seeing what they thought visually, soon for the convenience they began to use their spirit powers to create a connected interface. It's become really popular, although some still prefer the old ways of just doing it all using BAU.
Yeah, my dad hates it. He tells me that your BAU is your business. It shouldn't be shared for the whole heaven realm to see. But he never restricted me from doing it, so I just keep it a secret," Danielle replied. She used her finger to stretch out the interface so it was big enough for both her and Sai to see. Sai's face seemed to change as she scrolled over Danielle's holographic profile page. "There are no pictures of you, and your profile doesn't say anything about you," Sai replied, moving her fingers to scroll the page with a confused look on her face. "You only have one friend on here." Danielle's face lowered self-consciously. "It's my dad," she replied, rolling her eyes sorrowfully as the screen disappeared with a flick of her wrist. "I've never really had friends."
"What a surprise," Luke replied, not missing the opportunity to get in another dig. When their ages were different, it seemed like genuine dislike, but now, with Danielle's age shift, it seemed almost like there was an uncomfortable game of footsie being played in front of us. Luke tried desperately never to look at her as he made comments. It was almost like he was afraid his mouth would drop open without his consent again.
"Luke!"
Sai replied, staring at him sternly.
"I'm sorry, Danielle. I didn't mean to say... I wouldn't have said anything about the number of friends if I knew."
She shook her head and forced a smile.
"It's okay. I don't care," she said, looking down vulnerably. "It's because of my parents. Ever since I can remember, people have never treated me normal. They were always so intimidated. My dad was so overprotective. When I said I wanted to be a guardsman like my mother, he freaked. He humored my dream, but he rarely let me be a regular kid. I spent the majority of my time alone. My only connection to the outside world I got from my tutors and masters. My dad refused to allow me to take real missions, even though my skills surpassed the majority of the kids my age."
She looked out the window sorrowfully.
"That must have been frustrating," Sai pressed,
playing an armchair psychiatrist. She nodded, acknowledging Sai's comments before continuing.
"He would only let me go on missions that I could do solo," shaking her head hopelessly. "Soon all the kids at my prep academy began to believe that I didn't take the missions because I thought I was too good to do missions with them."
"Why didn't you tell them it was your dad?" I asked, gauging her obvious discomfort. She laughed, amused by my naivete. She shook her head, quickly educating me.
"I couldn't do that. It would have been more embarrassing," she snapped. "What was I supposed to say? I'm a baby whose dad doesn't think she's mature enough to carry out her own missions? Yeah, that'll go over well. I mean, even those two brats, Zach and Joe, were allowed to roam unhinged, and they're not half my age. Besides, my dad's an elected official. If something like that got out, it would be a media disaster."
Sai shrugged, contesting the statement.
"It's kind of unfair to you, though," she replied,
taking the words out of my mouth. She shrugged her shoulders in agreement. "Maybe," she replied mournfully. "But my dad is great, and he worked hard for his career. I'm not going to do anything to embarrass him. I'm used to it by now. It comes with being a Michael." I understood where she was coming from. I felt the same way. As much as my brother and father annoyed me, I never wanted to do anything that would embarrass our family name. It was why I resented Jacob's abilities so much. It seemed like with every great thing he did, the expectations for me were that much higher. I carried it in everything I did. She once again stared out the window, as if to be reminiscing with a heavy heart as she continued. "They began to shun me and say rude things as a result," she explained, punching her palm with a clenched fist. "That didn't make you angry?" Sai replied, looking around at us for help. "I wanted to pound them," she replied, looking Sai in the eyes as she spoke. "But I couldn't. The media would have a field day with that." "The media is like that, even in this realm?" Jacob replied. "Well, it depends on what you mean," she explained. "Do they report things for mass consumption? Of course they do. Do they make up things to lie or torment celebrities? No. Elected officials like my dad are under constant scrutiny, so everything about him is relevant, and as his only child, how I am being raised is an extreme look into my father's rearing in action. I have to watch the things I do." "But you were just a kid," Sai replied. "You didn't tell him what you were going through at school?" She lowered her head repentantly. "No, I couldn't. He had enough to worry about. I didn't want to add to his troubles. Besides, I learned to deal with them in my own way," she replied. "I learned to be stern with them, and even if they didn't like me, I knew I could use my status to get them back for the things they said. That worked for a while." She stopped and exhaled deep, as if she was trying to keep her composure. "But in the end, it only made them hate me more," she continued. "I didn't care, though. I hated them too. I didn't care about the lot of them. I had more fun by myself anyways. Who needs friends? They're annoying anyways, or at least, that was how I used to feel. That was until I met Abby." Her words gave us a more detailed view of her. Uriah was spot on. She wasn't the brat she appeared to be. She seemed like an insecure and lonely girl. "Who's Abby?" Sai asked as the limo screeched to a halt. The girls, Jade and the twins, are still in a meeting. They'll be down soon," said a voice via BAU. "Who is that?" I said, turning to Max. "She's the secretary," he replied, still staring at his invisible screen. "How did she know we were out here?" Sam added. "Energy. They have a monitor that is set to recognize visitors through their faith energy," he replied, as if he had the response ready beforehand. "Danielle, you were talking about Abby?" Sai pressed. By this time, everyone in the car, aside from Max, was drawn into their conversation. Even Luke was noticeably sitting forward, trying his best to be inconspicuous as he listened in. "Oh, she's my best friend, or she was my best friend. She came to the Heaven Realm with her parents. She didn't know much about the Heaven Realm," she continued. "Why?" Sam inquired. "Well, actually, it's normal of many Earthborns. Since the parents are as new as the children, they don't know much about the realm. Which for me was a good thing. There was no bias," she replied, before pausing with a nostalgic smile. "I still remember the day we met. She was treated like a pariah because, like Sam, she was a SOC. I ran into her as she huddled against a wall after she had broken down from the teasing. I helped her to her feet and asked if she wanted to train with me. She was overjoyed. After a while, we became inseparable. Everyone still teased and made fun of us, but we didn't care. We had each other, and for over 50 years, that's all we needed." "Wow, 50 years! I couldn't imagine. 50 years of school," Sam interrupted. "Sam, shut up," Sai replied, staring at him sternly. "So, what happened to Abby after that?" "Well, her having access to my tutors and trainers began to show. She became good, really good. Before long, no one paid attention to the fact that she was an SOC. They just knew she was good.
We went blow for blow when sparring. She matched me at every turn. I didn't care because she was my friend, and we were the cream of the crop at the academy. But soon the other students began to treat her different. They became more accepting. It was like they forgot all about her being a SOC. Some even began to take up the belief of some of the more bigoted Lightborns who believed that some SOCs are good because their heritage was more Seth than Cain. But whatever it was, she became friends with the other students, leaving me on the outside. She never changed as a friend, though. She was the same Abby she had always been, but I became jealous and accused her of being a bad friend for becoming friends with the same people who tormented me. She explained that she never let an unkind word come out about me without saying something. She also consistently tried to talk me into changing the way I was. She stated that if I just changed the way I was and let people see the real me, they would see I wasn't bad. I knew what she meant, but the fact that she would ask me to change, the one who was the first one to give her a chance, it hurt me, and I didn't know how to express that. I asked her to leave, but not before saying that I should have known better than to help a pathetic SOC. The hurt in her eyes was almost immediate. I tried to apologize immediately, but it was too late. The damage was done. She said that everything people said about me was true, which only made me feel worse. You could hear the pain in her voice as she spoke. So what happened after that? Sai questioned, holding her hands for moral support. Nothing. We never spoke again. That was almost 50 years ago. A talent like hers wasn't going to go unnoticed, and soon she was accepted into the Alpha House Prep Academy. She became famous for the mission she would carry out with her legion. Every time I saw a clipping or news story about her, I would become insanely jealous. We were friends and equals on the battlefield, and she was hailed as a prodigy, and I was stuck doing rogue runs by myself. I wanted to call her and congratulate her for what she had done, but with all the publicity she received, I felt like she would have felt I was doing it to get a piece of her fame, she replied, leaning back with an exhale. After years of the Alpha House probing my father for my services, I knew he wasn't going to budge on that issue. I figured I was stuck. That was until I saw a new story on you guys a couple of months ago. I knew my coming of age was coming up, and I would finally be able to make my own decision on my future. I decided then that since you guys didn't know anything about me, I would be better off joining you guys than the snobs at the Alpha House. But when Jacob referred to me as the princess, I knew I was already labeled. Danielle, I don't mean to pry, I asked, gun-shy. But when we got the mission, we were told that you were kidnapped. What happened with that? She smiled and shook her head once again, only this time she wore a regretful smile as she looked up at the ceiling. I saw you guys in action, she responded. What? We all responded in unison. The next news story showed these three taking on the Mount and Tim's extraordinary abilities, she replied. I knew that people would feel like I was put on the team because my dad was trying to fast-track my career. I mean, come on, up to that point, the only missions I had to be exaggerated to be considered D rank. I needed to prove myself. I knew I had the talent, so I knew it was just a matter of waiting for a good mission to pop up. It only took about a week or so before I got the drop on a case that was difficult but easy enough for me to do by myself. The actual mission was done without a problem. No, the problem came afterward. I was ambushed and taken hostage once they figured out I was the ambassador's daughter. They threw me into a cell, and within an hour or two, Jacob was busting me out. I was so embarrassed that I didn't even want to see my dad, and sure enough, there I was on the front page. Ambassador's daughter in deep, Legion Theta Delta to the rescue. I was crushed. The article portrayed me as a spoiled brat that stole someone's case, and never even disclosed the fact that I actually completed the mission. I'm sorry. I guess I kind of took that frustration out on you guys. Don't worry about it, Jacob replied, extending his hand. She smiled and stared at him, still trying to work through her social awkwardness.
She reached out and grabbed his hand, shook as she surveyed our smiling expressions. "You're a part of the Theta Delta Legion now," he replied, patting the back of her hand. "Whatever happened in the past is in the past." "You were nice to someone like me when others weren't. You're okay in my book," Sam added. Uriah sat forward with a smirk. "Yeah, we've all done things we're not proud of. Even more things we wish we could take back, so don't be so hard on yourself. Besides, with all the problems in this legion, you'll feel right at home," he replied, chuckling. "Regardless of how annoying you are, you're on the squad. That makes you one of us. That makes you family," Luke added, sitting forward. "Still doesn't mean I like you, but I can do a clean slate." She tried to hold back the chuckle that seemed to spill out. "If you didn't have friends before this, you got a lot now," Sai replied, smiling from ear to ear. Danielle blushed before turning toward the window to shield the emotions that were evident in every lasting glance. "I just need to use the restroom real quick," she murmured as she headed toward the door. We watched as she headed toward the restroom. Luke waited until she was safely on the other side of the limo before sitting forward and staring at Uriah with an inquisitive stare. "Dude, you're scary," he said with a smile. We all laughed as Uriah smiled before shrugging his shoulder in a jokingly apologetic fashion. "Yeah, remind me to keep my guard up," Sai replied flippantly. "One evening slip-up, and he might expose every secret I have." "Who's to say I haven't already?" he jabbed. As we joked, Pete, Eve, Beth, and the twins entered the limo, with Jade filing in right after. "What is going on?" Pete replied, sitting down next to me. "Yeah, what's going on?" Eve added. Sai opened her mouth to tell everyone the news about Danielle, but before she could, Danielle exited the bathroom, perplexing everyone. "Who's the hottie?" Eve spouted with a smile. She paused, then twisted her face as she slowly began to recognize the familiar, unfamiliar face. "Oh, no way! Is that Danielle?" she replied, covering her mouth. "What? Is this an illusion or something? I know we took a while, but even the Heaven Realm can't age a person that fast." "It's a long story," Sai replied, preparing to tell Eve the whole torrid tale. As we headed to our next destination, I sat back and began to look out the back window. The rest of the crew discussed Danielle's change, their experiences with their agents, and their upcoming schedule as we headed back to see our living quarters for the first time. I stared at the beautiful sky, knowing that with the light of God, I would never have to worry about it becoming dark. It was like a source of happiness that would never subside. I thought back to purgatory and the worries of earth. That day I had been stressed, angry, sad, and even lustful. But throughout it all, I never felt like my emotions were out of my control. It was funny to hear the imperfection of the people in Danielle's life. Thinking back, I could remember how naive I was just a month ago when Michael said the people in the Heaven Realm were flawed but still good. I couldn't understand it then. But the longer I dwelled in the realm, the more I understood it. These people had the same emotions as we did. But on earth, those worries clouded the spirit. In purgatory, they buried them. Here, even though the worries were still present, they seemed closer to a minor annoyance. My spirit felt so light. I had never felt so at peace. I knew that someday I would have to face that world again. But at that moment, I never wanted to leave the Heaven Realm.